What if you were able to sit down for lunch with some of the greatest leaders in the world? What would you ask? What would they say? Welcome to the Linch with a Leader podcast, where you're invited to join us in learning the spiritual principles behind big success. Here's your host, Mike Linch.
God is where I am, and God is where I'm going. I tell you what, this conversation with Steve Cuss could change your life. If I've never met you before, my name is Mike Linch, and it is my honor to welcome you on this leadership journey, as we're all seeking to be the leaders that we were created to be in the spaces and places that God has put us. Well, I am so glad you've joined me for episode 234. I get to sit down with an amazing man. Amazing pastor when he pastored, amazing chaplain when he was in a chaplain, amazing leader and coach now, amazing author. But I'm going to tell you something, the other reason he's amazing. His insights and his ability to process what God is up to in the spaces that cause us anxiety are things that we all need. I got off this call with Steve Cuss talking about his newest book, Expectation Gap. And I'm going to tell you something. The Lord truly did something in my life during this call, because I'm like you. I get nervous when I face the unknowns. And there are some things that Steve shares in this episode that may not be for anybody, but they were for me. And I've shared them so many times since Steve and I's call. I am so excited that you're joining today, because today could be one of those that's a save, a tag, a bookmark that you go here every year, one time to remind you of the things you know to be true, but you just so often forget. So I don't know where you're listening from today, but I want you to do me a favor. I want you to pull out something to write with. I want you to pull up a chair, and I want you to listen in to my conversation with Steve Cuss. Well, Steve, it's great to have you join me again on Linch with a Leader. Thank you for coming in.
Good to be with you, Mike. I thoroughly enjoyed our last chat, so I was excited when you asked me to come back on. Thanks so much.
Well, you are, we were talking a little bit before we went on the air, you are one of my leadership groups. I run 9 leadership groups, and you're one of everybody's favorite authors. You write in such a way it resonates with leaders. What do you think it is about your style that leaders go, yeah, I just get that? What would you say?
I love that. I'm so happy to hear that. For whatever reason, between my experiences and my gifting and my own pain, my own kind of leadership pain, I'm committed to noticing patterns under the surface and not stopping until I can name it. So I take quite a bit of time to name it, and then I field test it with people. Is this it? Do you feel this too? So I'm always looking at myself, my people. Now that I do this full time, I'm often, when I go do a workshop, people maybe want me to do, managing leadership anxiety workshop. I'll say, hey, I'm working on this new thing. Do you mind 10 minutes? This is what I'm thinking. And of course, people enjoy that they get to field test. But I think what I'm able to do is I'm able to name what you've felt your whole life. And you've never put words to it. Or for some people, when I hear this feedback, they say, I didn't know there was an option. It was such a given in my life, this pressure or the inner critic or, the imposter syndrome, whatever it is we struggle with. But for somebody like me to come along and say, it doesn't have to be that way. There's actually a way to wrangle that. I think that's what's going on. I take great joy in mining deep and coming back to the surface with this thing and naming it. And my team that work with me, if they were on the show, they'd say, oh yeah, like once Steve has started naming it, we kind of need a few months until he's done, because my initial thing is never the best version of it.
That's right.
It takes a few shots of testing with people.
When
I
did
think
you
that's what's going on.
When did you discover that's a superpower of yours?
Not that long ago.
Wow.
When I wrote MLA, Managing Leadership Anxiety, I was a full-time pastor, and it was really that my dear friends Jeff and Sherry Surratt, they said, you need to write a book. And I'm like, no one's going to read. No one knows me. And that was true. The book came out and nothing really happened. And then COVID, just less than a year after the book came out, we all shut down and everyone discovered their anxiety. So I didn't know this about myself until maybe 2022, 2023, when I started hearing it enough that I started believing, like, okay, what? And sometimes I would just say to this, I feel a little self-indulgent talking like this, Mike, but I would ask people, what is it I do? What do you think I do? And they'd say, man, you name what I've been feeling. Like I've been feeling this for 20 years. And I sit with you and maybe I'm teaching a workshop and they say, and it's dissolved. It's now that I've named it. So I'm so motivated for people. I don't want to be the smartest guy in the room. I want you to go away saying, oh, I can totally do this. That's my story. Anybody can do this work. Anybody can be well in stressful leadership encounters.
You know, it's so funny when you find people that are great at something, most of the time they knew they were good at it. They didn't see it. So in our next episode is a guy named Brad Lomenick. I don't know if you know Brad.
Love Brad.
Well,
I love Brad.
Brad's superpower is connecting people. That's Brad's superpower.
Amazing
so in our
human
episode, we're all about, Brad, I want to unpack what you do, and you don't even know you're doing it. My wife and I were watching a master class with Joanna Gaines, talking about how she does her house.
Yes.
Well, my wife's a decorator, and she's saying all the things my wife just does naturally, but she can't tell you how she does it. Yeah. It's a fascinating thing. What have you missed about pastoring, knowing that was your background for so long and probably how you dreamed you would retire to what you're doing today? What's that journey been like?
Oh, great. I loved pastoring. I mean, it was very hard. It was never not hard for me. Associate pastoring was fine. Lead pastoring, I always loved it, and it was always hard. Those were always both true. I love what I do now. The two things I miss most, I still read my Bible, but I don't study it like I used to. Pastoring made me study my scripture. I miss that. I'm not in the discipline of getting my commentaries out as much. My congregation is now primarily leaders and mostly ministry leaders. My real focus is people in church or nonprofit ministry. I miss hearing the stories of the hotel manager and the school teacher. I think the local church, I think it's amazing. I'm still a member of the church I used to lead. I'm a congregant at our church now. So I still get the great benefit of being in relationship with the people I used to pastor. But I would get up to preach, Mike, and I'd look around and think, there are hundreds of secrets in this room that I know. People have privileged me with their secret or what they're afraid of or their mistakes. That was always incredible. So I missed that. I suppose I also missed, as the lead pastor, I had the privilege of all of us on staff of being able to direct people and money to what we felt God was calling us to do. And that was amazing. I know, for example, you do so much work in your local community. We did too. We worked with our police force and our educators, our social workers. And it's really up to my ability to convince our board that that's a good thing to do. And then our board's like, go do it. And now I can hire people and put money toward it. And that was an amazing privilege as a lead pastor. Having said that, I can't believe I get to do what I do now, and I get so energized by it.
Hey, you're living in your sweet spot. That's the beauty of where you're at now, isn't it? You're living in that sweet spot. Your newest book that came out, Expectation Gap, I remember, I don't know whose podcast you were on when I heard you say the words. I just remember coming home, shooting you an email going, I've got to get you on. And I hadn't even read the book yet. I just heard y'all talking about it because expectations are things that create so many problems. So let's just take the word expectation. Why are expectations in any relationship so dangerous? They're good and they're bad.
What a great question. Of course, there are good, healthy expectations, but the problem with expectations as a general rule is they assume certainty. They kind of fool you into thinking you know something, and you don't. And so, the problem, I think, is that we are called to live by faith, which means we're called to be uncertain. And it's hard for the brain to be uncertain. And so because the brain kind of wears out in ambiguity, we rest in expectation and assumption. The heart of my work is reactivity. That's what I focus most of my time on. And the first book was reactivity in our human relationships. But it really woke me up to realize, man, we have so much reactivity in our faith relationship with God and in our church experiences. And that's the problem with expectation. And of course, there are things that my wife expects out of me that she has every right to expect. Those are good. That's part of our intimacy and our covenant with each other. But when I assume things about my wife and think I know what she's thinking, or oftentimes we assume motive about each other when we really don't know, man, that gets us into trouble. It creates anxiety so quickly.
You say right at the beginning of the book, there's a struggle with what we believe about God and what we experience from God. How far into your Christian journey did you begin to unpack that? Where you went, okay, I'm going to say it out loud, what I have been feeling on the inside.
Yep. I became a believer in 1985, and I hit a wall in 1996. So 11 years. So as a teenager, I had youth group faith. I say that, by the way, very affectionately
That's right.
toward youth group. I think very highly of my youth group experience. I then had Bible college faith. I had the same affection for I loved my Bible college experience. But what I mean by those is they were very sequestered and sheltered. And then right after Bible college, of course, famously, I became a trauma chaplain, 1996. That was also the first year of my marriage. And I had never been exposed. The grief and suffering and death outpaced my theology to cope with it. That would be my way of. So, when Jesus says, build your house on the sand, I would like to say to Jesus, I didn't know I was building. No, I don't know any builder that intentionally builds on sand, but you don't know until the storm comes. And then you're like, oh, wow, my faith in a true God was built on sand. So that was my journey. I was incredibly privileged back in the 90s that the chaplain supervisors introduced me to Frederick Buechner and Philip Yancey and people who paint with darker colors in the faith. And then I went to a seminary after chaplaincy that also was very comfortable with doubt and ambiguity. So I feel like I was treated incredibly kindly. As kids talk about deconstruction today, I feel like a bit of a grandpa. I'm like, oh, I did that back in the 90s. Get off my lawn. I was deconstructing before anyone even knew. But because chaplaincy became like a litmus test to my faith. So that was when it started for me.
Yeah, and I think you said it well, the youth group answer, the Bible college answer doesn't work with a family that just lost everything and their whole world has fallen apart. When you look back at that, if you had removed the trauma therapy and you had gone straight from Bible college straight into pastoring, what would have missed about what God needed you to be for today? What would you be missing,
Mike,
if you hadn't have done that?
What a question. I mean, I've done a lot of podcast interviews. That may be my favorite ever question, because chaplaincy got me to the end of myself and the end of my faith within 90 minutes. So I was chaplain for a year. For those unfamiliar with it, medical residents, if you watch your TV hospital dramas, you know that a medical resident is a medical student that does a residency. What people don't know is that ministry students can do a chaplain residency even today. If you're in a large city with a teaching hospital, they'll have a chaplain residency program, and that's what I was doing. And they intentionally don't tell you what to do because you can't teach someone. The only way to do it is to go in and do it. And so, famously in my first book, I put us in chapter 1 of my first book, I put us in that first encounter with me. I put us in the room with me to try to help my reader feel as disoriented as I did. It's a bit like a Christopher Nolan movie. I wanted the reader to have that same visceral feeling that I was having in the moment. If I didn't have that, I would hope that at some point in my ministry life, I would have gotten to the end of myself. Being in the room with a dead body and screaming people will do it. That you can't escape it, because I walked into that room with, again, I say this affectionately, with my Bible college tools. I know it's kind of cool for some pastors to rag on Bible college and seminary. I love both. And for me, it's less about, oh, they didn't teach me these things. And it's more about, I was young, and in the human development scale, I was a black and white thinker, right? Like, that's really what's going on in college. It's not that the professors didn't help. They've had their grief and suffering at their age, but I'm this 20-year-old kid where the world is blue and I'm a white guy and I'm large and in charge. Well, so I graduate from Bible college with all of these ministry tools on my tool belt, which is my Bible knowledge, my ability to explain things, my wit, my charm. I can work a room. It's almost like when I walked into that first encounter with people screaming, it feels like God pushed a button and my tool belt just fell off.
Wow.
And I walked into that room like naked, like, oh, where's my Bible knowledge? Where's my wit? Where's my charm? And it's all gone. And I've got nothing. I can't reach for anything. And what do I do? And so just to be a human being in God's presence and in the presence of pain, it took me 12 weeks to accept it. I fought the process for 3 months. And then the next 9 months of my chaplaincy was nothing but a gift. I realized God has given me this experience because without it, I would be a dangerous person. I would be high potential to be another one of those church scandals that you read about.
Well, you think about it, and you're getting married. So, I mean, processing, I cannot imagine processing all that, because basically I've been in ministry 30 plus years. You took 30 plus years of ministry dealing with families and consolidated into a couple weeks. I mean, it really, I mean, it's sort of crazy. Was that tough for you to take home, really not knowing? And then your wife, I know she's in the same field now.
Yeah.
How did y'all process it as a couple as you dealt with your losing and you creating some expectation gaps you're beginning to see?
Yeah. Yeah. I think we've all had intense seasons, right? And first year marriage is often it, and first ministry is often intense. Well, mine just happened to be packed into 1 year.
That's right.
You know, the last day of our honeymoon, Lisa dropped me off at the hospital for my first day of chaplaincy, and it was a 28-hour shift. She dropped me off at 8 a.m. one morning, and she picked me up at noon the next day. Crazy. What happened is, one thing I haven't talked enough about, it's going to be a future book. I'm doing a doctorate right now on this work, is every morning the chaplains gathered for 90 minutes of debrief. And it was functionally group therapy, 2 chaplain supervisors, 6 of us that were residents, all in a circle for 90 minutes a day. And so that, I didn't know that was part of the program, but of course that's how they speed you up. That's how and what they're doing is they're putting the spotlight on you under the surface. So how is it I'm good at this? I mean, part of it is my childhood was tricky and I learned some skills to survive childhood. But at 24 years of age, every day for 90 minutes, they were forcing me to look under the surface. And then I was helping my peers look under the surface. That experience was what I fought for 12 weeks. Because they were very aggressive and very invasive. I was so unaware that everything they pointed out was blind spot knowledge. So the first time I've ever heard about an issue that I have, they're showing it to me. I didn't know it was there, but the moment they say it, it's all I can see. It's kind of like when you want to buy a Honda Accord and then you see Honda Accords everywhere.
That's right.
So they're saying, Steve, you have this desperate need to fix everything. And I'm like, no, wait, who are you to tell, get back off. But as they're saying, I'm like, crap, what? And then I'm like looking through my whole life. I've always, what? And so that was the shift after 12. So I would first go home to my wife saying, this thing is crazy. This program, these people are liberal. They don't believe in Jesus like I do. They're all aggressive and mean. And something clicked at week 12 where I'm like, wait, these people love me unconditionally, actually.
Mm-hmm.
I can show, this is the first group of humans that I don't have to have any pretense with. And actually, I can't have pretense because they're seeing things that I thought I was hiding so well. I was even hiding from myself. I'm putting up this front. Hey, look at me. I'm the Bible answer man. I'm witty. I'm funny. Look at my charm. And they're seeing right through that to my deep, my fears, my dark solutions, and they're just very happily showing them to me, sticking in my face. Week 12 was me, it was almost like God said, look, you can either embrace this or you can keep running, but this is a gift. And I think my supervisors would even say there was a significant posture shift in me where I then went from this kind of pugilistic to, what else do you see? I want everything. I want to see everything you have to show me. Now, Lisa was studying to be a school teacher. She's a couple of years younger than me. She's 22. And she's now a trauma therapist, and she just became a therapist in 2018. So we're both on a newer journey, but she's always been a therapist, if that makes sense.
I bet.
And I didn't realize that my overconfidence, my quick wit, my intellect were all coping mechanisms for deep insecurity. And so it'd be interesting to see Lisa's take on the first year of marriage, but mine was, wow, I'm being unconditionally loved at home and I'm being unconditionally loved at work. That would be my testimony. She has and remains God's number one human conduit of healing in my life.
That's so good.
So I just feel spoiled, Mike. I just feel really spoiled that this extremely intense workplace environment I was able to process at home. There were some things I've never told Lisa, that I've never told anybody, that are still, they're not front of brain, but things I've seen, conditions of bodies and things like that. That what's interesting is since writing MLA, and I tell more chaplain stories, some of them are coming back more, and I've wondered about popping in for some trauma therapy because they're not that far from the surface. Some of those encounters from almost 30 years ago now.
That's amazing. It's so funny. You think about whoever wrote Hebrews when they said we run the race marked out for us, and you're on your path. God got you on that path, running for what he wants. And I love because you put words, and you said this earlier about yourself, you put words to what so many other people feel when they're deconstructing, when they're going, is something wrong with me? Is my faith not deep enough? You began the book by talking about 3 of them. I believe God loves me, but I don't feel like it. I believe God's with me. I don't see him. and I thought I'd be further along by now.
Yeah.
Of those three, which one of those have been your recurring weight that even though you conquered it, you go back to it? Well,
I believe God
any one
loves
of those
me.
three?
I believe God loves me, but I don't feel it. Is my number one gap.
How come
and then
you
I
think?
think the number one gap in our church communities is I should be further along in my faith.
I think so too. Yes, I think so too. It was so funny. Sunday in a message, I'll be talking about Simon Peter getting out of the boat.
Yes,
That was fantastic. You really screwed it up. I just want you to know that. So what you said in there was so good, though. We always focus on him getting out of the boat. Jesus never told him to get out. It was Simon's idea. Jesus said, come on. If you want to come on. Why do you think we have a tendency to heroize, right, the act that Simon Peter was doing? I know this is on in the book a little bit, but why do you think we have a tendency to do that? And then we make everybody feel guilty. They weren't Simon Peter and they weren't getting out of the boat, but yet Jesus never addressed them and told them to get out of the boat. What would you say to that?
I think what's going on, there's two dynamics going on. We all feel incredible pressure, very earnest, good-hearted pressure to follow Jesus well. He's our sovereign king. We want to do a good job. That's good. That's a good motive. And so in our effort, especially in Western culture, and when I say Western, I'd also include highly productive Asian cultures. When I'm in Southeast Asia, I run into the same thing. What we do is we forget the division of labor between us and God, and we reach into God's job, which is grow us in Christ, and we take it from God, and we try to grow in Christ on our own strength. So I just think it's a modern legalism that we read Peter getting out on the boat and we say, I must always walk on water by faith. And we read Mary sitting and soaking at Jesus' feet. I must be less hurried and sit and soak better. And we never stop to say, wait a minute, Mary and Peter were nothing like each other, and yet we feel the pressure to be the perfect version of both of them. We put more pressure on ourselves than God puts on us. Our well-meaning effort to grow is the very thing that's keeping us from growing. So I think that, and then the second dynamic is related. Not only do I name things that we feel, I'm always looking for something that's not true that we all talk like as if it's true. And I don't believe we're lying in the church. I don't believe that the church is intentionally, I'm a pastor. We're not deceiving our people and our people aren't deceiving each other. What we've done is we've perpetuated an expectation that is false. It started for me in youth group. And it was a follower of Jesus is 100% all in, sold out, fully devoted. Now, I'm a systems theorist. My job is to notice patterns and assumptions and test them. And so I started asking people, what does that look like? How do you know you got there? And people would get quite combative with me, Mike. Oh, the point isn't to get there, it's to try really hard. Really? That, like the way a greyhound is trying hard to reach the rabbit in the race? You know the rabbit's not real, right? Like you start to realize, what if we are chasing something that God has not actually called us to chase? I used to be on church staff where we said our goal is to make you a fully devoted follower of Jesus. And I kept saying, I didn't have any power in that church, it was a big church. I kept saying, what is it? How do we know? Like, really? Like all that's doing is putting people under more pressure. So I think that's what's going on. So yes, if I were to preach that sermon, I would say to the congregation, 92% of the disciples stayed in the boat. 92% of us should not walk by faith this week. Just watch Peter make another mistake. It's okay to laugh at him. And if you read the end of that story, all of the disciples worship Jesus as the Savior. Yeah, so there's a lot more, there's some nuance but that's kind of the idea there.
If Jesus could come down and tell us, if he could get all the pastors in a room, and most of the people that listen to this podcast, they're business leaders, they're in athletics and all the things, but humor me for the profession we've both been in. If Jesus could get us all in a room and he could give us any advice about standing in front of our people, knowing everybody in there, whether there's 200 or 2,000, they are all dealing with mental expectation gaps with the Lord. They're all of them. Everybody's dealing with them, including ourselves. We're all dealing with them. What do you think he would want us to know that they ultimately need that we could do for them? What would you say he would say to that group of pastors? Just do this. This is all I need you to do. What would you say?
It's always dangerous, right, for me to say, here's what I think Jesus would say. But I do think what Jesus is actually calling us to be is human-sized. So Peter was human-sized. He had the kind of personality that a lot of leaders have. He was probably entrepreneurial. He tended to speak before he thinks. I can relate to Peter. I am prone to that. I tend to act before I think through all the implications of it. And so that's Peter's shadow side. It's also his strength, which made him bold and courageous in Acts and foolish more often than not in the Gospels. That's fine. Then you've got a Mary. We don't know much about Mary, so we put onto her. But let's say she's probably more like a Richard Rohr, a Henry Nouwen kind of person. She just is more prone to contemplate. That's great. So we have our contemplatives, we have our activists. I think Jesus would say to us, your people are already incredibly pressurized by their culture. Make the church a relief valve. Don't pressure already pressurized people with a false gospel. The false gospel being, this week, try harder to be like Peter. Next week, try harder to be like Mary. Read Acts chapter 2. Look at how they sacrifice. You should be sacrificing more. Look, I put this in the book too, Mike. If you and I were sitting in church one Sunday and the announcement lady is up on stage and a big storm blows a ball of fire on her head, and we're looking at her hair, you and I, we're like, I don't think her hair's catching fire. And Mike, you're saying to me, that's weird because she's got a perm, like she's got Aquanet in the hair, highly flammable hair. And yet somehow miraculously the tongue of fire is resting on her head. And then she starts speaking in Farsi. And behind you and I, during the meet and greet, the thing that people hate, right? Turn to your neighbor. During the meet and greet, you and I met the Afghan refugees, and they had really broken English. They just have shown up. They could barely say hello to us. And we said to each other, hey, after the sermon, let's meet with them and just welcome them. She's speaking in Farsi. We hear them crying behind us. The first time since they moved to America, they hear the gospel in their language. They're overcome. They feel seen. If this lady would say to you and I, we need a car. This family needs a car to get a job. We would be racing each other up on stage to give our, we'd be so thrilled to be part of the move of God. What we do today is we read that event in history and Book of Acts, and we try to curry that kind of response out of people without the miraculous encounter that generated that response. I just think we mean well. Pastors, we're all, I don't blame pastors for this. I could see why it might be a shot at preachers. It's out of self-interest that I'm not going to do that. I'm a preacher. Because you and I feel that same pressure that our congregants feel.
That's right. That's right.
And systems theory just shows how we all spread expectation and reinforce false narrative over decades. I mean, people have written books on, how to be a better follower of Jesus, and just read Acts chapter 2 and try harder to be more like them. Or I've even read books that say, see the persecuted church in China? Look how fat and lazy we are in America. I'm like, come on, man. Like, that's not the way it works. It's not, try harder has never worked. I guess I'm using a lot of words.
No, and it goes totally against John 15 on just abiding. And I mean, we say this all the time. I just think we've made it very complicated.
Yeah.
We've made it very complicated, and we sometimes make it complicated. I got to come back and hear the next complicated thing that'll rehash what we talked about last week.
Yeah.
You talk in here about stuck patterns. This is so good. You hit assumptions, reactivity, and stuck patterns. What are stuck patterns you find that leaders can get into, even when it comes to their beliefs and walking with Jesus and trying to be like Jesus in the marketplace, right?
Yeah.
Taking their faith to work.
Yeah.
What are some stuck patterns that you've seen through the years in leaders' lives?
It's easy to see a stuck pattern in a manager. What you're looking for is when an employee behaves badly. Maybe they're chronically late and they act like they're never late. Maybe they blow up at another employee. What you're looking for is, okay, as the leader, what do you do next? And I'm a conflict avoider, so my attempted solution is to act like it didn't happen, or to carry the anxiety rather than making them carry it. So when I'm doing organizational consulting, I'll just ask 3 questions. Number 1, who's generating most of the anxiety on your team? Who's the number 1 anxiety generator? And this is not scapegoating. And if you stick with me long enough on the consulting, you find out we're not scapegoating. Okay, second question, who's carrying it? And the third question, what adjustments are everyone making to keep it unaddressed or unspoken? So somebody's always late, they act not late, they're generating it. I'm carrying it. Oh, you know what? They probably had a hard day. Instead of just sitting them down and saying, you can't do that here. When you are chronically late and then walk in like you weren't, that disrespects everyone's time. I want you to know I'm not going to tolerate that. But instead, I just let it go on. I make excuses for that person. So that would be a simple example of a stuck pattern. In the home front, the easiest stuck pattern to notice is trying to get a child out the door for school on time. What you're paying attention to as a parent is your side of the equation. You're so fixated on the frustration with the kid, you're not recognizing, for example, in my case, the expectation I have about myself of what it means to be a good dad. If I was a better dad, this kid would get his crap together. It's crazy how I kind of teach anxiety like a pork barrel in a Senate bill. Like the bill is about this, but we keep piling on these extra things. Anxiety kind of piles on all this meaning to the situation. So it's no longer about my son packing his lunch. It's also become about my competence as a father. I don't know that, but I've got this reactivity in me. That would be an example of a stuck pattern. And then in the church, I believe the big stuck pattern is that we have taken God's job and tried to make it our job. So I believe our job as a follower of Jesus is, to your point, quite simple. It's worship and it's following. Well, and I guess the third thing, which is part of following, is my job is to die to self. Where am I in the way of God's work in me? It's worship, following, and dying to self. God's job is forming me into his likeness.
Mm-hmm.
But I read the Bible as if it's my job. And so when I see Peter, I say, I'm not doing a very good job of walking by faith. I need to try harder to walk by faith. I ask people in these seminars, I'm like, is there ever a week in your life where you think it's okay to stay in the boat? Do you get a week off? And then you start to realize all of the things that the Bible isn't interested in, like doing laundry. Did the disciples do laundry? Did they recreate? Or were they always doing Christ and him crucified? Were they always on mission? There are 1,250 days of Jesus' ministry, and the most days recorded across all four Gospels is 57.
How about that?
Yeah. Now, it's not that they didn't do anything for the other, 1,200 days, but what did they do? The Bible it's not ripping us off. The Bible's not the problem. It's the expectation we put on the Bible that gets us into trouble.
It's one of my favorite things about The Chosen.
Yeah.
And watching that and seeing them riding in the boat across the water when they were just making fun of Matthew or whatever they were doing, because they were just a bunch of guys doing what guys do. It was, and I thought, I've never thought about it that way. I never thought about what happened between the stories, what happened when they're on their way. You said something in the book, I'll tell you, man, it really grabbed me. The only gift you have to offer God is a well self. What does that look like to you? For you to be well, for you to be whole, and for people to give themselves permission to be well, to offer themselves to the Lord, because it ties in exactly with what you were talking about.
Yeah. A well self means that I am willing to receive gifts as much as I give them away. So as a pastor, I pour my life out for people, but I'm not prone to letting people pour out for me. So a well self learns to differentiate between my precious belief in Jesus and my core beliefs about myself. And that is where my capacity to experience God's love is at a crux. Because Jesus says he loves me, that's my precious belief. But my core belief about myself is I'm not lovable. I am not worth anybody's time. And that core belief has driven most of my life. And then it comes out in these weird ways. I don't tend to pray for myself. I have to make myself pray. So I've got shingles right now. You and I were chatting before we recorded. I'm on the back end of a shingles fight that's been brutal. I've had it I'm coming up on 4 weeks. I just started praying for myself 3 days ago. I've got all kinds of people praying for me, and I'm great with that. But I'm like, what is my problem? Well, my problem is I don't think it's worth bothering God about. He's got more important, harder things going on. Isn't that crazy, Mike? So a well self wrangles my core beliefs about myself and dies to them. Lord, you know that I don't believe I'm worth loving, but you say I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. I'm going to die to my faith in myself, and I'm going to place my faith in you. That means now I can let people love me instead of always serving others. It means that if I am to help others in the worst moments of their life, I have to be in touch with what's going on in me. That was the big lesson of chaplaincy. So it's an integrated self. It's a human-sized self. I still do very difficult things in my work. I'm in difficult, complex situations, but I don't feel the pressure to fix because it's ultimately God's. I just do the best I can. It's a human-sized effort with a supernatural God. I don't know. That's not very concrete.
No,
more concrete
I
things
love
in the book,
that.
but,
I remember when my dad passed away back in February of 2017 and sitting there, and they came out to say they were going to pull life support, and my sister, my mom, and my brother and I were sitting there, and they said, would you like a chaplain? And my sister goes, no, my brother's a pastor. And I went, right now I really don't want to be. I just want to be his kid.
Yeah.
And we got our pastor from growing up on the phone.
Yeah.
and who prayed with us. And, you know, it's those moments, and I wanted to be the superhero with the cape, and I couldn't find the cape. The cape wasn't there.
Example.
And those are hard. Those are hard things too. They're hard things. And then you stand in the receiving line. Well, I'm never in a receiving line. I'm there standing at the front with the casket. I'm not in the receiving line with the family. But I tell you, when you said that, the permission piece is a big one, especially for leaders, because I think the more high strung you are, the more you demand of yourself.
Yeah.
What would you tell them if they were sitting across from you about why it's okay to give yourself that permission? Because if you don't, you will what?
Well, burnout and destroy your precious relationships is the most extreme version of the end of that sentence. And we are seeing that happening nonstop. You know, it's about weekly that some story comes out of some Christian leader, whether it's a ministry leader or something, but they are a person of faith and they're blowing something up. They're blowing themselves up, their marriage up. So that's the extreme version of it. What I would say is I try to teach those type A driven leaders. That's kind of the way I'm wired. Just be suspicious of your strengths. It's not that you do away with them, but what humans do is we take the gifts that God has given us and then we turn those gifts into idols that we have to be okay. So one of my things that I'm good at is I'm good at researching and learning. That's a human-sized thing, but then I need you to know how smart I am. I need to always know the answer. Now I'm like in the grip of slavery. I'm very courteous and thoughtful. That's human-sized, but then I become a people pleaser. And I tell you what you want to hear. Now I'm in the grip of slavery. What we do as Christians is we take our coping mechanisms that have got us through life and our faith in Jesus. These are two separate things, and we make them one thing, like unquestioned. And that's what I did as a pastor for a long time. I thought rushing in to save the day was my job, but it turned out it was my coping mechanism. And the problem is I'm good at it. So it doesn't feel like a coping mechanism. The gift I was given as a chaplain is I got to meet all my coping mechanisms in the face of death. And
that's right.
Death is just unrelenting. It doesn't negotiate, so you can't shrink it. Whereas my need to shrink someone's problem so I can fix it, I thought was me being helpful. I didn't realize it was an anxious response. And then put me in a room with someone dying, and there I am madly trying to shrink it by quoting Psalms. You know, it's like, what are you doing, man? Like, death is death. Sometimes the last thing people need is a word.
That's so true.
Yeah.
That's so true. We're going to take one of these. You sort of do a deep dive into these gaps on God's particular love. I believe God loves me, but I don't feel it. And you begin to talk about your inner board members.
Yeah.
Fantastic. My wife and I were driving and talking about this last night. Just fantastic. Unpack for our listeners, because I want them, they've got to get this book because it is so good. Unpack some of those committee members, these unpaid boards that you have going on up here and in here. Unpack that a little bit, because these are fantastic.
I mean, I really enjoyed writing this chapter because it helped me figure out which board members are in my life.
Yes.
This theory, you know, if you've seen Inside Out, the Pixar movie, that would be a helpful. It's based on a thing called Parts of Self. And it's the idea that, I've got, for example, some people who have trauma in their background, they have like a sentry or a soldier. I picture Jack Nicholson from A Few Good Men, you know, you want me on that wall, you need me on that wall. It's like this soldier doesn't know when to stand down. Because your body was threatened with trauma, the soldier is always looking for threats, but it has lost its ability to discern between a real threat and a false threat. And so, you know, in our church, for example, we would have military snipers come home from, and they would sit in the back row of our church, no one behind them, so they could relax. That's because their trauma soldier is telling them you must be on hypervigilance all the time, and their adrenal system is never relaxing. So if you picture, you know what it's like when you preach, you've got a bit of an adrenal response, and then after you preach, Sunday afternoon, thank God for football.
That's right.
You know, you kind of had that down. Well, you picture a sniper that they never get that down. Even in their sleep, their adrenal response is going. Well, that's what happens to me with people pleasing. So I have I call him my childhood agreements officer. The way I survived childhood was making whoever was angry at me happy, you know, in the room. And I just brought that guy right into my adulthood and into my ministry. So I've got a number of different committee members, and we all have, some of us have unique, like not everyone has trauma, but we have some in common, and one would be the inner critic. Like several years ago, I'm not a very good handyman, but I do handyman projects, and I laid hardwood in my house. We had to replace the wood, and I didn't want to pay, so I learned how to do it. And, that first board, it takes 2 or 3 hours to set the first board because that sets the whole house. But I had to wrap the hardwood around a hallway where it ended up meeting in the middle of the hallway, came from either side of the hallway. And that final board, I had to cut it in the shape of a rhombus. I was off by about 1/2 inch from being true. Now, I don't know if I was off or if the house was off. I don't know who's to blame. But every time people, for the next several months, people would come to my house, they'd see my new hardwood project. And they'd say, that's beautiful. What do you think the first thing I did with those people was?
Pointed at the board.
I will walk them over to the hallway and say, look at this rhombus. Because I don't want them seeing it and thinking I don't know. And I don't want them seeing it where I can't control their response. Because if they condemn me for a rhombus board, that hurts too much. So I'm preempting their condemnation by condemning myself. That's what your inner critic is doing. Your inner critic is standing on guard, condemning you to protect you from outside condemnation. The inner critic, in my opinion, is the biggest threat to experience God's love, because John says in 1 John 3, when we stand in God's presence, our heart condemns us. That's our heart saying to God, look at the rhombus hardwood board. And John says to us, your inner critic can stand down, man. You can stand in God's presence loved. He's not going to condemn you. There is no condemnation. It's really powerful. So out of all of the committee members, for me, the inner critic is the one to start with because it's the one blocking God's love the most. But for people in trauma, I don't believe I carry childhood trauma, but when I work with people who have untreated trauma, they are prone to blow up their relationships. And it's because their trauma century has said that person's a threat to you when they're really not. It's tricky.
There is so much in this book, so much. And it's one of those you don't even know where to start because every chapter you could just literally, you could live in that chapter and have an hour conversation just about one little piece of it. But I want to close today. Right towards the end, you made a statement. God is with me. God with me. God's already ahead of me.
Yeah.
God is with me. This morning I was on a call with just finished being a college athlete and just doing some struggles in life and some anxiety. It popped up and I got a text last night. So I was driving between appointments and this young person called me and I quoted that because I said, let me tell you something I learned last night. If people could only get that, God is with me and God's already ahead of me.
Yeah.
What would it do for their journey with Jesus?
You know, what's funny is that mantra has helped me so much in my life. I used it in chaplaincy. Like, I got to walk into a room of death again. Maybe it's 2 a.m. Maybe I've had 4 deaths that day. And just wait a minute. God's already in the room. It's not even that I'm bringing him with me. It's that I'm entering a space where he's at work. What's crazy about that is the circumstance around me doesn't change at all. I have to sit down with that difficult person. I have to do this difficult job. But just remembering I'm not alone. What it helps me, Mike, is it helps me right size what's my responsibility, what's God's responsibility. So, let's say with death and grief. I mean, chaplaincy is really a ministry of restraint. What you are doing is restraining your impulses to make it better so that you can be present to people in their pain. And it's very hard work. I mean, if you ever watch a hospital chaplain, it doesn't look like they're doing much. But they are working so hard just to stand there and be present. But as I'd walk into that room of death to realize, okay, God is the God of all comfort. He's here. I can't take this away, but I can sit with this person as long as they need. I didn't think I could do that because I'm kind of running on fumes, but actually I can do that. I can do all things through Christ. So for me, it's like an exchange of labor. I'm always testing my pressure through Jesus' promise that his burden is light. I had a really dark moment in 2015 as a pastor where I told Jesus off. I'm not proud of this. Like, you lied. Your burden is not light. And Jesus kind of said to me, well, that's because you're like piling on. You're piling on. So I'm always testing, is this difficult thing that there is still a lightness to it? Because what ends up happening is I try to do more than God has asked me to do. So it just helps me order what's mine, what's God's, what's theirs. And almost every time when I do that, I look at what's mine to do and I'm like, I can do that. I can do that. Right before we got on this call, I got a text from a friend who's been profoundly impacted with his refugee work now that President Trump is in office. You know, President Trump's shutting all these things down.
Yeah.
It has real significant consequence, people losing their jobs and refugees. And he's asked me to do something about it with him. I don't know what I can do. I do not know, but I will absolutely meet. And I'll be, okay, what's my job? What's God's? What's others in this, really what's a colossal complex situation? But I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid to walk in and listen to him and see what I can actually do to help. But my anxiety says, well, what can you do? It's a big federal thing, you know. So this exercise helps me do hard things rather than avoid them.
Rich. I tell you what, man, there's just something about Steve's perspective that I need. I just need to hear it and just be reminded God is with you. He is where you are and he is where you're going. He's got you. He's going to be good. It's going to be good. He's got you. And I tell you what, I know that. I've told so many people that. But hearing it from Steve was such a great linchpin, if I can say that, for my faith. He's got me. We're entering into a very unknown season here at North Star, but he's with us and he is where we're going and he's with you too. Thank you so much, Steve Cuss. You left us better today for your time with us. Man, if you enjoyed this episode, I hope you'll leave a rating and review, share it with a good friend, listen to it again, put it on social media, subscribe, do all the things so you don't miss an episode. Because I tell you what, next time we're back together with a guest, we'll be sitting down with Barry Rowan and talking about the spiritual side of business. And it is so good. Barry is a phenomenal thought leader, and you are going to be better for our time with Barry. Well, once again, thanks for joining me today. Now, I want you to do me a favor. I want you to go love God, go love people, and go live sent in the spaces and places that he's put you, and let's make a difference for him today. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you for listening to the Linch with a Leader podcast with your host, Mike Linch. If you enjoyed this episode, you can help more people hear it by subscribing and leaving a review wherever you may be listening. For full episode notes and more spiritual leadership resources, visit MikeLynch.com.